Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and for the first time in your life, you see yourself with absolute clarity. Not the version you've carefully constructed for the world, the competent professional, the loving friend, the person who has it all together, but the real you. The one who exists beneath the masks, beneath the carefully rehearsed responses, beneath the persona you've spent decades perfecting. And what you see terrifies you. Because there, staring back at you in the mirror of your own consciousness, is a stranger. Someone who harbors thoughts you'd never admit to. Someone who feels emotions you've been trained to suppress since childhood. Someone who wants things, desires things that contradict everything you've been taught to believe about who you are. This stranger isn't foreign. This stranger is you. The you that you've been running from your entire life. Now imagine something even more disturbing. What if I told you that this stranger has been making your decisions all along? That every relationship you've sabotaged, every opportunity you've inexplicably turned away from, every pattern you've promised yourself you'd break but never did, what if all of it was orchestrated by this hidden aspect of yourself? What if the life you think you're consciously choosing is actually being directed by forces within you that you've never dared to acknowledge? If you're ready to confront the most unsettling truth about your own mind, one that Carl Jung spent his lifetime trying to reveal, then stay with me until the very end of this exploration. Because what I'm about to share will fundamentally challenge everything you believe about who you are. And if this journey resonates with you, if it awakens something you've always sensed but never named, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. This kind of content, the kind that doesn't just entertain but transforms, reaches those who are ready for it only when you engage with it. Now, let's continue. This is not a metaphor. This is not philosophical speculation. This is the psychological reality that Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to make humanity understand. And it is the single most important truth you will ever confront about yourself, if you have the courage to look. Here's the paradox that Jung discovered, the one that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The parts of yourself that you reject most violently are the very parts that control you most completely. The emotions you refuse to feel don't disappear. They grow stronger in the darkness of your unconscious mind. The desires you deny don't fade away. They express themselves through the back channels of your psyche, sabotaging your conscious intentions. The aspects of your personality that you've deemed unacceptable don't cease to exist. They simply operate in the shadows, pulling invisible strings, determining your fate while you remain blissfully unaware. Think about the person who annoys you most. The one whose very presence makes your skin crawl. What is it about them that triggers such a visceral reaction? Their arrogance, their neediness, their aggression, their vulnerability? Now ask yourself this uncomfortable question. What if your intense reaction to them isn't really about them at all? What if they're simply reflecting back to you something that exists within yourself, something you've buried so deeply that seeing it in someone else feels like a violation? Jung called this projection. And it's happening to you right now, in ways you cannot even begin to imagine. You are walking through a world that functions as a mirror, constantly reflecting back the hidden contents of your unconscious mind. But instead of seeing yourself in these reflections, you believe you're seeing objective reality. You believe you're reacting to external circumstances, to other people's flaws, to the injustices of the world. But what you're actually reacting to is yourself, the parts of yourself you've exiled, the parts you've forbidden yourself to acknowledge. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. There is a law operating within you right now, a forbidden law that governs your entire existence. It wasn't written by any government, any religion, or any external authority. It was written by your own unconscious mind, carved into your psyche through years of conditioning, trauma, and survival. This law dictates what you're allowed to feel, what you're permitted to desire, what you're capable of becoming. And you follow this law with absolute obedience, never questioning its authority, never realizing that you're imprisoned by rules you created yourself. The awake, those rare individuals who have confronted this truth, understand something that the sleeping masses never will. You cannot break free from a prison you don't know exists. You cannot heal wounds you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot become whole while you're still rejecting half of who you are. So the question isn't whether you have a shadow, Jung's term for this hidden, rejected aspect of self. The question is, will you dare to meet it? Will you dare to look into the abyss of your own being and see what stares back? Or will you continue living under the tyranny of this forbidden law, forever controlled by forces you refuse to name? Because once you see it, once you truly understand the mechanism by which your shadow operates, everything changes. Your past suddenly makes sense. Your patterns become clear. And for the first time in your life, you have the possibility of real freedom. But that possibility comes with a price. The death of every comfortable illusion you've ever held about yourself. The mechanism by which you became a stranger to yourself didn't happen overnight. It began the moment you entered this world and encountered the crushing weight of societal expectation. From your first breath, you were being molded, shaped, conditioned into a form that would be acceptable to the collective. And in that process of becoming acceptable, you lost something essential. You lost your wholeness. Carl Jung understood this with a clarity that bordered on prophetic. He recognized that human civilization operates on a fundamental bargain. In exchange for safety, belonging, and social acceptance, you must agree to amputate certain parts of yourself. The wild parts, the unruly parts, the parts that don't fit neatly into the boxes that society has prepared for you. Your parents, your teachers, your culture, they didn't set out to harm you. They were simply doing what had been done to them, perpetuating an ancient pattern of psychic fragmentation that stretches back through generations. When you were a child and you expressed anger, what happened? Perhaps you were punished. Perhaps you were told that good children don't get angry. So you learned that anger was dangerous, that it threatened your connection to the people you depended on for survival. And so you split off that anger, pushed it down into the basement of your psyche, locked the door, and pretended it didn't exist. But it does exist. And it's been living in that basement ever since, growing in the darkness, feeding on your denial. The same process happened with your other forbidden emotions and desires. Your jealousy, your selfishness, your sexual impulses, your aggression, your neediness, your grandiosity. Every aspect of your natural human complexity that was deemed unacceptable got exiled into what Jung called the shadow, the dark twin that follows you everywhere but remains forever unseen, at least by your conscious mind. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this same pattern from a different angle. He wrote about the slave morality that Christianity had imposed on Western civilization, a morality that taught people to be ashamed of their natural instincts, their will to power, their fundamental life force. Nietzsche understood that when you tell a human being that their deepest drives are sinful, you don't eliminate those drives. You simply force them underground, where they ferment into resentment, neurosis, and what he called life denial. Arthur Schopenhauer took this insight even deeper. He recognized that beneath the thin veneer of rational consciousness lies something far more primal, the blind, surging will that animates all existence. We like to think we're rational beings making conscious choices, but Schopenhauer knew better. The will operates beneath awareness, driving our actions through forces we neither understand nor control. And when we refuse to acknowledge this hidden dimension of our being, we become puppets dancing on strings we cannot see. Jung synthesized these insights into a comprehensive map of the human psyche. He understood that the shadow isn't just a repository for negative traits. It also contains all the positive potentials you were taught to suppress. The confidence you were told was arrogance, the ambition you were taught to hide, the creativity that made adults uncomfortable, the authentic self-expression that threatened the social order. All of it, the light and the dark, sits in your shadow, waiting to be reclaimed. But here's the insidious part. The shadow doesn't just passively wait. It actively shapes your life in ways you cannot perceive. Jung called this acting out unconsciously. You repeat the same destructive relationship patterns because your shadow is seeking something it was denied. You sabotage your own success because a part of you believes you don't deserve it. You feel inexplicable anxiety because emotions you refused to process decades ago are still churning in your unconscious mind, generating symptoms in the present. This is why therapy often fails. This is why self-help books often don't work. This is why you can understand intellectually what you need to change, but find yourself unable to change it. Because the real driver of your behavior isn't your conscious mind, it's the shadow. And the shadow cannot be reasoned with, cannot be motivated by inspirational quotes, cannot be fixed with 5 easy steps. The shadow can only be integrated through the difficult, terrifying work of turning around and looking directly at what you've spent your entire life running from. The forbidden law, then, is this: you must remain unconscious of your shadow, or face the collapse of your carefully constructed identity. This is the devil's bargain you made without realizing it. You traded wholeness for safety, authenticity for acceptance, power for belonging, and now you're living half a life, controlled by the very parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. The cost of living unconsciously is far greater than you realize. It's not just that you feel disconnected from yourself, or that certain patterns keep repeating in your life. The consequences run deeper, threading through every aspect of your existence like an invisible poison that corrupts everything it touches. And the most terrifying part? You've become so accustomed to this poisoned state that you mistake it for normal. Consider the phenomenon that psychologists call repetition compulsion, the mysterious tendency humans have to recreate the same painful scenarios over and over again. The woman who swore she'd never date another narcissist finds herself, 3 years later, in an identical relationship. The man who promised himself he'd stop self-sabotaging his career does it again, right when success is within reach. The person who finally escaped their toxic family dynamic somehow recreates that exact dynamic with their friends, their partners, their colleagues. Why? The conventional explanation is that we're drawn to what's familiar, even when it's destructive. But Jung understood something more profound. The shadow seeks completion. The parts of yourself you've rejected are trying desperately to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. And if you won't look at them directly, they'll arrange your external circumstances to force you to confront them indirectly. Your relationships become mirrors. Your failures become messages. Your suffering becomes a teacher you refuse to listen to. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." You believe you're unlucky in love, unlucky in your career, cursed with bad timing or bad genetics, or bad karma. But what's actually happening is that your shadow is orchestrating events from behind the scenes, pulling you toward the very experiences that could heal you if only you were conscious enough to understand what they're trying to show you. Neuroscience has begun to catch up with what Jung intuited a century ago. We now know that approximately 95% of your cognitive activity happens below the threshold of conscious awareness. Your brain is constantly processing information, making decisions, forming judgments, and initiating actions before your conscious mind even knows what's happening. The story you tell yourself about being a rational agent making free choices, that's largely a post hoc narrative your conscious mind constructs to explain decisions that were made by unconscious processes. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Your shadow doesn't just influence your personal choices. It shapes your entire perception of reality. Cognitive biases like confirmation bias, projection bias, and the fundamental attribution error, these aren't just quirks of human cognition. They're mechanisms by which the shadow protects itself from exposure. You see what you expect to see, because your shadow has already decided what's safe to perceive and what must remain hidden. Think about the last time you had a strong emotional reaction that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Someone made a minor criticism and you felt devastated for days. Someone succeeded in an area you care about and you felt consumed by envy. Someone showed vulnerability and you felt an inexplicable urge to withdraw or attack. These aren't random emotional glitches. These are your shadow asserting itself, showing you exactly where your rejected parts are hiding. The societal consequences are equally profound. Carl Jung believed that much of the horror of the 20th century, the world wars, the genocides, the totalitarian regimes could be traced back to collective shadow projection. When entire populations refuse to acknowledge their own capacity for darkness, they project that darkness onto external enemies. The Jews, the communists, the capitalists, the other race, the other religion, the other political party. We create monsters outside ourselves to avoid confronting the monster within. This is why every generation swears it won't repeat the mistakes of the past and then proceeds to repeat them in slightly different forms. We haven't learned the fundamental lesson. The enemy is not out there. The darkness is not in them. It's in us. It's in you. And until you turn around and face it, you'll keep externalizing it, Keep finding new targets for your unconscious projections. Keep perpetuating the cycle of conflict and suffering that has defined human history. On a personal level, the price of avoiding your shadow is a life of quiet desperation. You achieve the goals you're supposed to want, but feel empty. You maintain the relationships you're supposed to have, but feel disconnected. You present the image you're supposed to project, but feel like a fraud. Because you are a fraud, not in the sense that you're deliberately deceiving anyone, but in the sense that you're living a half-life, animating a persona that isn't truly you. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, understood something crucial about human suffering. The greatest burden isn't pain itself, but meaningless pain. When your suffering serves no purpose, when it teaches you nothing, when it simply repeats endlessly without evolution, that's when it becomes unbearable. And this is precisely the kind of suffering that the unconscious shadow generates. Meaningless repetition, endless cycles, pain that goes nowhere because you refuse to look at what it's trying to show you. The shadow also steals your creative power. Jung believed that the unconscious mind is the source of all genuine creativity, all authentic innovation. But when your shadow remains unintegrated, that creative energy gets trapped, distorted, expressed in destructive rather than constructive ways. The artist who can't create becomes the critic who tears down others' work. The leader who won't embrace their power becomes the passive-aggressive underminer. The lover who can't accept intimacy becomes the serial relationship saboteur. Breaking free from the forbidden law requires something most people aren't willing to give: radical honesty. Not the performative kind of honesty where you admit to socially acceptable flaws. I'm a perfectionist. I care too much. I work too hard. No, the kind of honesty that makes you uncomfortable in your own skin. The kind that forces you to admit things about yourself that you've spent decades pretending aren't true. This is the rebellion Jung spoke of. Not a rebellion against external authority, but a rebellion against the internal tyrant you've constructed to keep yourself small, safe, and acceptable. And like all true rebellions, it begins with a simple but profound act. You stop running. You turn around. You look directly at what's been chasing you your entire life. The first step in shadow integration is what Jung called recognition. You must learn to recognize when your shadow is operating. And here's a precise diagnostic tool. Pay attention to your emotional reactions, especially the ones that feel disproportionate or inexplicable. When someone's behavior triggers you intensely, when you feel that hot surge of anger, that cold wave of contempt, that tight knot of anxiety, stop and ask yourself, what is this person showing me about myself? This isn't about self-blame or pathologizing your emotions. It's about using your reactions as data. If someone's confidence enrages you, there's likely a part of you that was taught confidence is dangerous or arrogant. If someone's vulnerability makes you uncomfortable, there's likely a part of you that had to shut down its own vulnerability to survive. If someone's success fills you with bitter envy, there's likely a part of you that doesn't believe you deserve success. The shadow speaks through your judgments. Every harsh criticism you level at others is a clue to what you're criticizing in yourself. Every quality you find disgusting or threatening in someone else is likely a rejected aspect of your own psyche. Jung put it bluntly, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The second step is acceptance, and this is where most people fail. Recognition is uncomfortable, but acceptance is excruciating. Because acceptance means admitting that you are not who you've been pretending to be. It means acknowledging that you contain capacities you've spent your life denying. You are capable of cruelty. You are capable of selfishness. You are capable of betrayal, of cowardice, of pettiness, of all the things you've judged in others. But here's the paradox that makes this bearable. You are also capable of far more greatness than you've allowed yourself to imagine. Your shadow doesn't just contain your rejected darkness, it contains your rejected light. The confidence you were taught was arrogance? That's in your shadow. The ambition you were told was greed? That's in your shadow. The creative wildness you were taught to suppress? That's in your shadow. The sexual vitality you were made to feel ashamed of? That's in your shadow. The assertiveness you were punished for? That's in your shadow. Jean-Paul Sartre understood this dynamic through his concept of bad faith, the self-deception we engage in to avoid the anxiety of authentic freedom. We pretend we have no choice, that we're victims of circumstance, that our patterns are fixed and unchangeable. But this is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terrifying responsibility of being free. The moment you integrate your shadow, you can no longer hide behind this excuse. You must face the fact that you have been choosing this limited version of yourself, and you can choose differently. The third step is integration, the active process of bringing shadow material into conscious awareness and finding healthy ways to express it. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or indulging every destructive urge. It means finding the kernel of legitimate need or capacity within the shadow material and giving it appropriate expression. If your shadow contains suppressed anger, integration doesn't mean becoming violent. It means learning to assert boundaries, to say no without guilt, to stand up for yourself when you're being mistreated. If your shadow contains suppressed ambition, integration doesn't mean becoming ruthlessly competitive. It means allowing yourself to want things, to pursue goals, without apologizing for your desire to succeed. If your shadow contains suppressed sexuality, integration doesn't mean becoming promiscuous. It means accepting your body's wisdom, your natural desires, your right to pleasure without shame. The rebellion then is this: you refuse to remain unconscious. You refuse to keep pretending that you're only the persona you show the world. You refuse to keep projecting your disowned parts onto others. You refuse to keep living half a life, controlled by forces you won't acknowledge. And in that refusal, you reclaim something that was always yours: your wholeness, your authenticity, your power. Now we arrive at the threshold of the deepest truth, the one that transforms everything that came before it. Because what Jung discovered in his decades of exploring the human psyche wasn't just a therapeutic technique or a psychological theory. It was a spiritual revelation disguised as science. And this revelation, once fully grasped, doesn't just change how you think about yourself. It changes the fundamental nature of your existence. Here it is. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It is your portal to transformation, your gateway to wholeness, your key to accessing dimensions of yourself that transcend the limited ego consciousness you've been identifying with. The very thing you've been running from is the thing that will set you free. The darkness you fear contains the light you seek. And the forbidden law you've been following, the law that says you must remain unconscious of your shadow, is the only thing standing between you and your true power. Jung understood something that most psychologists still haven't grasped. The goal of human development isn't to become better in the conventional sense. It's not about perfecting yourself, eliminating your flaws, or becoming some idealized version of who you think you should be. The goal is individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating all the fragmented parts of yourself into a unified, conscious being. And you cannot become whole while rejecting half of who you are. This is where Jung's work intersects with the deepest spiritual traditions. The mystics have always known what psychology is only beginning to understand. The path to enlightenment doesn't go around the darkness, it goes through it. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree and faced Mara, the demon of illusion, before achieving awakening. Christ descended into hell before rising to heaven. Dante had to journey through the inferno before reaching paradise. These aren't just metaphors. They're maps of the psychological process that every human being must undergo to achieve true liberation. Your shadow is your personal underworld, your private hell, your interior darkness. And the journey into it is the most important journey you'll ever take. Because on the other side of that journey is something you cannot even imagine from where you currently stand. You discover that you are not who you thought you were, not even close. The ego, the conscious sense of self that you've been defending and protecting your entire life, is revealed to be a construction, a useful fiction, a role you've been playing. Beneath it, beyond it, lies something far greater. What Jung called the self, with a capital S. This is not the small self, the personal ego, the individual identity you've been clinging to. This is the totality of your being, the archetype of wholeness, the divine spark within you that connects you to something infinitely larger than your personal story. And here's the revelation that changes everything. Your suffering, your struggles, your painful patterns, none of it was meaningless. It was all part of the process by which your psyche was trying to push you toward this realization. Every time your shadow sabotaged your plans, it was trying to show you that those plans were based on ego identification rather than authentic selfhood. Every time your projections created conflict, it was trying to show you what you needed to reclaim within yourself. Every time your defenses failed and you were forced to confront uncomfortable truths, it was your psyche's way of breaking down the barriers between your conscious mind and the deeper wisdom of the unconscious. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but you cannot become who you truly are while you're still pretending to be someone else. You cannot access your authentic power while you're still invested in maintaining the persona. You cannot experience true freedom while you're still obeying the forbidden law that keeps you unconscious." This is why shadow work is not just psychological, it's alchemical. The alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, and they were describing this exact process. Taking the base material of the shadow, the rejected, denied, suppressed aspects of self, and transforming them through conscious awareness into something precious, something powerful, something divine. What you thought was your worst enemy turns out to be your greatest teacher. What you thought was your deepest shame turns out to be your hidden strength. What you thought would destroy you turns out to be what saves you. But let's be absolutely clear about something. This transformation is not comfortable. It is not easy. It is not something you can do halfway. The integration of the shadow requires you to die, not physically, but psychologically. The version of yourself you've been defending must be surrendered. The story you've been telling about who you are must be rewritten. The identity you've been clinging to must be released. And in that death, something new is born. A version of yourself that is no longer divided, no longer at war with itself, no longer controlled by unconscious forces. When you integrate your shadow, something miraculous happens. Your relationships transform because you're no longer projecting your disowned parts onto others. You can see people clearly for who they actually are, without the distorting lens of your unconscious material. Your decisions become clearer because you're no longer being pulled by hidden motivations you don't understand. Your creativity explodes because you now have access to the full spectrum of your psychological energy, not just the sanitized version you've been allowing yourself to express. You stop being a victim of your patterns and become the conscious creator of your life. You stop reacting to triggers and start responding with awareness. You stop seeking validation from outside yourself because you've found validation within, in the acceptance of your own totality. You stop trying to be perfect and start being real. And paradoxically, in accepting your darkness, you access more light than you ever did by denying it. This is what the truly awakened understand. The forbidden law, the command to remain unconscious of your shadow, is the last chain binding you to a limited, fragmented, inauthentic existence. And the moment you dare to break it, the moment you turn toward your shadow instead of away from it, the moment you choose consciousness over comfort, that's the moment you step into your power. Not the fake power of the inflated ego, but the real power of integrated wholeness. Jung spent his entire life trying to communicate this truth, and most people still don't understand it. They think shadow work is about fixing what's broken, about becoming healthy or normal. But Jung knew better. Shadow work is about becoming sovereign. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were stolen by conditioning, by trauma, by the demands of civilization. It's about remembering that you are not a fragmented collection of acceptable traits, trying to hold it together in a chaotic world. You are a whole being, containing multitudes, capable of holding paradox, powerful beyond measure. So here's the final question, the one you must answer for yourself. Will you dare to break the forbidden law? Will you dare to look into your own depths and meet what's there with courage and honesty? Will you dare to stop being who you were told to be and start becoming who you actually are? Because if you do, if you take this journey into your own shadow, you won't just change yourself. You'll change everything. Your presence will shift. Your energy will transform. You'll stop being another unconscious person stumbling through life, controlled by forces they don't understand. You'll become awake, aware, alive in a way you've never experienced before. The question is no longer whether the shadow exists. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you close this awareness back down, return to comfortable unconsciousness, and continue the patterns that have defined your life? Or will you take the first step on the most important journey you'll ever make, the journey into yourself, into your darkness, into the wholeness that has been waiting for you all along? The choice, as it always has been, is yours. But now, you can no longer say you didn't know. Now, you can no longer pretend ignorance. The forbidden law has been revealed. And whether you break it or continue to obey it will determine everything about the life you live from this moment forward. Welcome to the threshold. What happens next is up to you.